Ralph, alcoholic.
Hi, Ralph. Adam, alcoholic.
Adam.
Welcome to anybody that's jumping in now. We are at the top of page 76. We just did the 7-step prayer. Wanted to recap a little bit of, for the people that are new or just jumping in or anybody else, until I understood what the problem was, the solution's not going to work. If the problem's alcohol, the solution is abstinence. And AA is like the Sober Elks Club. But if the problem really is this distortion in my perception of reality, this need to play God, this need to be right, this need to sort, compare, judge, label, this thing that I have where I need to arrange life to suit myself, then the solution has to be spiritual. And just going to read some of the ideas coming into this, going back to 62, where it starts to talk about what I'm going to be looking at in steps 6 and 7. I know we're at 8 and 9, but it's still very important that I start to see what it is that's blocking me. So it's asking these questions here. Do I see that I am driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity? Do I believe that selfishness, self-centeredness is the root of my trouble? Do I believe the troubles are of my own making? Because if people have to change for me to be happy, I'm never going to be happy. Basically, that idea leaves me in a place where I really can't recover because my happiness would be contingent on the outside. Am I extreme example of self-will run riot? It's a question. These are questions I ask new people all the time. It says, do I believe above everything I must be rid of this selfish? Now, there's the word rid of. The word rid means to remove. It also means purge, which is also synonymous with catharsis, to be rid of the things in me that are blocking me. So this is going to start to show me what I'm going to look at 6 and 7. When I'm coming through the inventory with a sponsee and I'm helping them to look at these fundamental ideas, selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Or for the people that do the 12 and 12, pride, anger, greed, gluttony, lust, envy, sloth. And when I go through a 5th step, I typically show people each of these ideas that are objectionable when they're writing their inventory. So it says, do I believe God can make that possible? Do I believe there's no way of entirely getting rid of self? There's that word again, without his aid. They say God doesn't give us more than we could handle. If that was true, I wouldn't need God's help. And here in 6 and 7, I start to see that I desperately need something greater than me. And when I go through the bedevilments with someone and I ask them those questions, are they still a prey to misery and depression? Are they unable to control their emotional nature? Are they still full of fear? Are they still having trouble with personal relationships? If drunk or sober, they can't manage those areas, it almost proves that they need a power. And that's where they start to move, or someone can move into this idea of having spiritual guidance. So very important. And it says, and it goes back to these ideas. Have I had moral and philosophical convictions galore? And they didn't fix it. So going through that, it says, do I need to have God's help? Coming through that process, I start to ask these final questions on page 72, and then we're gonna go right back into this. These are the questions coming out of inventory that typically I ask people. Do I think that I've done enough admitting these things to myself? Do I find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient? Am I the actor to the outer world presenting this stage character? Do I want to enjoy a certain reputation knowing that I don't deserve it? These are all really important questions coming into 6. And then it's going to ask me some other specific questions. Do I believe I must be entirely honest with somebody if I expect to live happily and long? So here we are. Ralph, do you want to start? We just did the 7-step prayer last time we were here, but that's a recap of the things that hopefully I'm looking at and I'm going to be rid of in 6 and 7. It's very, very important. I was told if I didn't change, my sobriety date would change. But in and of itself, until I got this on paper through admission, acknowledgement, and acceptance of these chunks of truth about myself, I couldn't move forward.
Okay.
Ralph,
alcoholic. And another thing for character defects, which just came to my mind when you mentioned that, is a way to remember the defects is PAGLs. PAGLs, pride, anger, greed, gluttony, lust, envy, sloth. All right, so in the middle of page 76, now we need more action. without which we find that faith without works is dead. And that's in parentheses, and that's from James 2. And basically what that means is just believing in God, believing and having faith in God is not enough for me to get better. That takes more action. This chapter is 17 pages. We're covering 7 steps. And this is the first part of the book, which really starts to involve other people and getting us well. And on the surface, it does not look like it has anything to do with me getting better at all. What do you mean I got to pay back money? What do you mean I got to say I'm sorry? What do you mean I got to admit my faults? On the surface, it doesn't look like it works. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We listed all the persons we have harmed and to whom we are willing, keyword, to make amends. We made it when we took the inventory. We subject ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. Now we go to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. And the consideration, when sitting with someone, are you ready to do this? It's just more of affirmation. And I share some of my experiences when I get to this point, when I'm going through the material with someone. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show. And again, do I believe that a life run on self-will could hardly be a success? Do I believe that I stepped on the toes of fellows and they retaliated seemingly without cause? A lot of third step involving self is involved here for the motivation to keep going. And run to ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. And that's an 8-step prayer right there. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we'd go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. And I have page 58 there, because on page 58 and how it works, it says if you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths, then you're ready to take certain steps. So you hear a lot of people in AA say, a lot of people do things different ways. One way is you hear people say, okay, we got this list. We're willing to, you make the list of the people that you're willing to do these amends right now. And then the ones that you're maybe, then the ones that hell no, I'm never going to do. That's not in our book, but whatever jogs your memory to do this, the key thing in here is the willingness, asking God for the will to make it and understanding the consequences that if I don't make these amends, what's likely to happen. Again, which we're going to talk about in a couple more pages, the spiritual life is not a theory, it must be lived. This is a theory that, it's easier for me to talk about this, have gone through it, than to just to explain it to someone who hasn't. Because it's the process of going through it that the change starts to happen, that the 8-step promises start to happen. Adam?
Yeah, there's a word called balked. At some of these we balk. This is where a lot of people stall out. This is where I stalled out in steps 8 and 9. And one of the exercises in that 4-step where it says we realize the people who offended us were also perhaps spiritually sick. And then it says, although we did not like their symptoms, which is column 2, and the way they disturbed us, column 3, like ourselves, were sick too. One of the ways that I started to be able to walk through 8, because really what 8 is, it's not the list as much as it is becoming willing. And when I started to look at each resentment, if I resented someone for gossiping, did I ever gossip? If I resented someone for stealing, did I ever steal? If I resented a parent for abandoning me, did I ever abandon anyone that I loved for my true love, alcohol? By doing that, I start to develop empathy and compassion. I cannot get to forgiveness, which is releasing someone from the prison of my own mind, without this process. This is a process that was indispensable for me to understand this bridge. And I'll do it now. Ralph's heard me do this. One of the things my sponsor did is he took me through the steps backwards. Again, conceptually, to understand what this is. Because if you look at 6, we can talk about 6 as doing things that I shouldn't do. In fact, 6 really brings me to a place where I'm starting to see that I'm getting high on these defects, and they bring me to my knees. But 7 is not doing things that I should. In the other community, they call it commission and omission. So now I start to look at what is it that's blocking me from this process. On page 25, it says, none of us like the soul searching, the leveling of our pride, which is 1 through 3, and the confession of shortcomings that the process requires. It's a requirement in order to stay here. Like the third tradition, anyone can be here. The only requirement for membership is a desire. But in order to stay here, that word consummation means completion. Maybe what we should say in AA is rarely have we seen a person fail that's done steps 4 through 9. I mean, rarely have we ever seen anybody do 4 through 9. I do what we call the AA waltz, 1, 2, 3, drink, 1, 2, 3, drink. And then I will start to play musical poisons in the first half of step 1, right? I'll switch from scotch to newcomers or some other kind of like distorted behavior instead of really addressing the spiritual problem. So one of the ways to go back through the steps, and then I'll finish with this, is that if someone's stuck in step 9, the problem's never in 9. The problem is either that they never made the list in 8 or they never became willing. Now, what would stop me if I was stuck in 8? It's either that I'm too selfish to make the amends, I'm too resentful to make the amends, I'm too dishonest to make the amends, I'm too afraid. I don't want them to know what I did, right? Or take the 7 deadly sins. I'm too proud to make the amends. I'm too angry to make the amends, right? I'm too greedy because I don't want to give them their money, right? I'm too slothful to make the amends. Watch how each defect will prevent me now from walking through the door of forgiveness. So if the problem is in 7, it's never in 7. It's actually in 6. It's one of these things now that's blocking me on the other side. Through selfishness. Like the first 6 steps are the disease, the second steps are the recovery. I never saw that division in 6 and 7. So if the problem is in 6, it's never in 6. The problem is actually in 5. And it says, I never discovered the obstacles in my path. I never put my finger on the weak items in the inventory. I never became willing and ready to have these cast out. Now, why would that be? Because I never did a 4-step. I never did a thorough, right, and fearless, moral, meaning conduct, inventory. So the problem, if it's in 4, it's never in 4. It's a 3rd step issue. I never made a decision to turn my will, which is my thoughts and my action, over to the care of this process. So the problem's never in 3. It's always in 2. And what that is I never came to believe in a power other than myself, because what agnosticism really is believing in God and living like there isn't one. Believing in spiritual principles and then ignoring them. So what the real problem is the second half of step 1, which shows me now that I'm not drinking, I don't really need any other help. I need to get a job, a house, a relationship, and a car, and somehow I'm going to solve a spiritual problem with a physical solution. And somehow that's where many, many people in Alcoholics Anonymous stop. And they're dragged through the rest of their lives. So if you're doing this, I think I have to start to look now at how I've built this spiritual house, the cornerstone, the keystone, and then the arch to freedom. Ralph?
Yeah. And again, this part is not in the book, but when I'm to this point with somebody, I go over, I still have cue cards. I still have my first, not my first one. I have my book, step work that I did when I was like 5 years sober. And I go over this stuff with the person to let them know, how the process is. But, we can talk about it all we want, but it's guiding them. It's talking about how to make the approach and going through it, that the real healing starts to happen. And think about when I hear the preamble all the time, it says the only requirement for membership. I hear the same thing. Yeah, that's not the only requirement to get well. And I think about what we say at the end of meetings, the Lord's Prayer, when it's said, that prayer is perfect regarding this. It says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And for me, when I got to this point, there was a ton of people that I wanted to make amends to. And this is my experience working literally with hundreds of people. Lots of people I want to make amends to, but then there were those that I was like, no way, there's no way. And by going through this process, those no ways became okay by continually asking for God and knowing at the end of that, yeah, the steps go backwards, but knowing at the end of that was a drink, that if I go insane again, that I'm going to pick up a drink of alcohol. And I wanted to be able to walk around, not having to worry about what happened in the 90s or the 80s. Like that's going to pop up, that I'm going to be out with my family, I'm going to run into somebody or something's going to happen. I didn't want that. I wanted to be free. And you hear people always say, how free do you want to be? And this is the key to freedom right here. This is the key to freedom, what we're going to be talking about tonight. There's very specific directions. Probably there are some misgivings as we look over the business acquaintances and friends that we have hurt. We may feel different about going to some of them on a spiritual basis, ? And you're gonna, let us be reassured, because we weren't talking about spirit stuff at the bar. You know what I'm saying? We're saying, oh, my higher power did this for me today, and I had this resentment. No, we weren't talking about that stuff. So let us be reassured. To some people, we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on the first approach. You notice how it says first approach, because sometimes we have to make this approach the second or third time or fourth time at the direction of a sponsor. And again, for me, I don't really get into the spiritual aspect of it. I just said part of my recovery and victory over alcohol is making right what I've done to you. And the key part is this: when I explain to them what I'm doing, I ask them, is there anything else? And then I shut up and listen. We might prejudice them. At the moment, we are trying to put our lives in order. But this is not the end of itself. And this is all highlighted and underlined. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. In other words, he's in charge. We're just trying to do his work. I'm an agent for God now. It is seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him or her and to announce to the world we've gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to branding or fanatics or religious bores? We may kill a future opportunity to carry the beneficial message. But our man is sure to be impressed with the sincere desire to set right the wrong. He is going to be more interested in our demonstrations of goodwill than our talk of spiritual discoveries. I'm not sure if I told this story before, but I was away in band camp, prison with this guy. We called him Rev. And this guy, when he came in, he was a stone cold drug addict, crackhead. He was like me. He did the same stuff I did. And this guy would get so spiritual and religious in there. And then I was still doing the same bit, and he'd be coming back. But when he got out, this is what we're talking about, leading with the chin. He would be talking about this, and this, and not just trying to get down to, the amend. And the word amend, if you look it up, means to repair, or it can, in some cases, it can mean make better. Adam?
I want to talk about the real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to others. Before we talk about amends, a friend of mine used to talk about an apple tree, and what the primary purpose or the purpose of an apple tree is to make apples, but it has a lot of other purposes. It provides food for animals. It creates fertilizer, but that primary purpose, this purpose of me fitting myself to be of maximum service to God and the people about us, that purpose somehow, by turning in that direction, what I never understood again is I can chase money, property, and prestige. That can be my purpose. But what this is asking me to do is to put this purpose, to be of maximum service to God and the people about me first. And somehow it's almost like money, property, and prestige will chase me in a different way. I cannot emphasize that enough. Ralph, one of the oldest amends stories is Clint Hodges, if you remember Clint H. And he was a trial attorney, and he was talking about going to make an amends. He went to Pasadena to make an amends for a burglary that he had done as a teenager. And it was such an interesting story because he goes back to this small little community like 30 years later, and he knocks on this door, and this old couple answers the door, and he says, 30 years ago, I burglarized your house, and I'm so sorry for what I've done. I've got some money. I'm so ashamed, but I wanted to make it right. And this old couple is very kind to him, and they tell him to keep the money and forget about it. And he starts feeling good, and he turns to walk down the stairs, and the old man turns around and says, "Thank you so much for coming and telling us that. All these years we've blamed our son for that." And it was such a powerful thing that I started to understand that these amends in many ways are not about relief. It is about reparation. It is about cleaning up the past. And the ripple effect of doing this in many areas of my life have been so different than what I expected. I've seen it with so many of my sponsees. You know, they go back and they make amends to their parents and their grandparents, and you see whole families reunited. You see this, something very different happens as a result of that. The gaining of self-respect, of camaraderie. There's something much greater here. So after we go through the rest of this, I think it's very important to say that in the beginning of the book, it says a further demonstration of these principles lies in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. You're going to see in the next 6 or 7 pages the principles starting to very loosely fit into these areas. You're going to see it with the employer. You're going to see it in relationships with infidelity. You're going to see it with creditors. Those 3 areas. And this stuff's very, very practical. I highly suggest if you're new, don't go from step 4 to step 9 without having somebody to talk to. Talk to a sponsor, talk to old timers about some of these amends before you jump into them. It's very, very important. And a lot of it has to do with we cannot save our own skin at someone else's expense. It is critical to use common sense, especially with relationships, with spouses, because a lot of times things like blameless kids and other people, their lives and their livelihoods are going to be at stake here. This is a very, very cautious part of the book if you're new. Do not just jump into this, I believe, without asking for advice and suggestions on this. Ralph?
Keep going. You can keep reading.
Okay, we don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God. Okay, because after he talked about leading with the chin, he says, when it will serve any good purpose, we are willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. Very important. You see the practicality of the language here. Okay, the question of how to approach the man we hate will arise. Like they say, it's easier to go to a friend than an enemy. This is where it is. It may be he has done more harm to us than we have done to him. And though we may have acquired a better attitude towards him, we are still not too keen about admitting our faults. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. It is harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. I have entire groups of my family that still will not talk to me 22 and a half years later. They will not take my call. They will not communicate with me because of my past. And that's just the way it is. I have to accept that. Ralph?
Yeah. Under no circumstances do we criticize a person or argue. Simply, we tell them we will never get over drinking until we've done our utmost to straighten out the past. We are there to sweep away our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so. Never tell him what he should do. His faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we'll be gratified with the result. And I went to this one kid, Richie, who I borrowed money from him without telling. That's called stealing. And this happened during spring break. And afterwards, he accused this other kid, Mickey, of doing it. And they got in a bad fight. Richie ended up winning, but we went on vacation or whatever. And when I went, I knocked on his door on a Saturday morning. I was living in Florida. I got a travel pass because I had to finish making my amends. I went and knocked on the door, and he goes, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And when I told him what happened, he goes, "You a-hole." And he slammed the door on me. And then I start leaving or whatever. He opened up the door again. He goes, "Hey, come back here." They used to call me Depuka. He goes, "Come back here, Depuka." He goes, "You really haven't drank in 18 months? And I said, "No, man, that's why I'm here." And he's not sober. I don't know if he's sober, but I didn't want to do that. And I went to do that with him. And I was surprised, In 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. And let me just tell you a quick story about the unexpected happening. On that same trip, I had to go to my Aunt Teresa. Now, when I got kicked out of Canada, yeah, you heard that right. I got kicked out of Canada. And on the way back to Florida, I stopped at my Aunt Teresa's. My Aunt Teresa is my godmother. I was a cellar dweller in her house. I had this little beat up car that she paid for several tires. She was blind and had dialysis. She had to have dialysis at the house. This was during the OJ trial, to give you a time frame. I would call her and say, oh, I needed a jump. My alternator went, all kinds of stuff. And we even stole money from her. And now here I am, sober man of Alcoholics Anonymous, have to go back to my aunt, who, when no one would take me, took me into the house. I opened the door. She goes, who's there? I said, it's Ralphie. She goes, come over here. She sit down. She grabbed me by the hand. She goes, you still doing that A&A? And I'm like, yeah, I am. And I had to tell her, and I almost was like in tears. I'm like, that's why I'm here. Part of me getting better is to making amends. She goes, oh, I know about that. Tina, my cousin, was in NA. And so as I told her that, about all the things I did, she just squeezed my hand and she goes, oh, honey, I'm blind, not stupid. I knew. She goes, we all knew. And that was one of the worst things in my mind that I was going to have to go through. She goes, you were my baby sister's oldest. And we were just all praying for you that you were going to come out of it. And I said, well, what do you want me to do with the money? And she says, well, give it to your cousin. So I gave it to my cousin Robert, and he used it for his insurance. So that was an amends. That it was all full of fear. Like Adam talked about all the defects of character that you're involved in, all fear. How could I go to this lady and tell her that I stole from her when she was one of the only people that let me live in her house? And I prayed. We discussed it with Jay, my sponsor. And I went in and I did it, and the result was pretty cool. All right, where was I?
We're at the first paragraph on 7.
9 out of 10 times the unexpected happens. Sometimes the man we are calling upon admits his own faults, so feuds of years standing melting away an hour. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Our former enemies sometimes praise what we are doing and wish us well. Occasionally, they'll offer assistance. It should not matter. However, if someone does throw us out of their office, we have made our demonstration and done our part. It's water under the dam. And I thought that was the end of it, that I was done. I tried to make the amends, but my sponsor sent me back to this one place several times. Most alcoholics owe money. We do not dodge our creditors. Telling them what we are trying to do, we make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. Nor do we try afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory it may cause financial harm. Approached in this way, most ruthless creditors will sometimes surprise us. Arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we are sorry. Our drinking made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors, no matter how far we have to go, for we are liable to drink if we are afraid to face them. There's a lot to digest there, Adam.
I look at this very simply. When I've been through this with sponsees, like when I went through it with my sponsor, if I don't follow society's rules, I live in a cage. If I don't follow some simple rules in AA, I'm a perpetual newcomer. My experience is that if I don't follow spiritual rules, I'm just unhappy. And these fundamental ideas are almost like spiritual laws of surrender, catharsis, restitution, and service. This is the restitution phase. It has a lot to do with justice. But there's a saying, Ralph, and I'm sure you've heard this: the cleaner my side of the street is, the less I care what other people are doing. It's fascinating. Like, if you ever notice who cries the loudest when something gets stolen, it's always the thief. Always. It just seems to be like that it's a spiritual law that anytime I am disturbed, it's never the outside circumstances. So it's like guilt is that I made a mistake. Shame is that I am a mistake. Guilt comes from the outside. Shame comes from the inside. In 1939, they didn't use words like shame, trauma, enabling, codependency. But I guarantee you, as we go through these fundamental spiritual ideas, you'll see all of that here, right? Like, there's a word called fear. Now we call it anxiety. Self-pity. Now we call it depression, right? These things have a lot to do with spiritual laws. I didn't know that, and I don't want to get into the therapeutic ideas, but I have seen that the cleaner my side of the street is here, the more I develop a quiet mind and a loving heart. So continuing on, perhaps we have committed a criminal offense which might land us in jail if it were known to the authorities. This we may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. We have already admitted this in confidence to another person. We are sure we would be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. I've had a lot of sponsees like this. Maybe it's only a petty offense, such as padding the expense account. Most of us have done that sort of thing. Maybe we are divorced and have remarried but haven't kept up on alimony to number one. She is indignant about that and has a warrant out for our arrest. That's a common form of trouble. So here he's starting to talk about he's gone from creditors to affairs now. Ralph?
Oh, Rodney, why don't we take a pause for the cause?
All right. Thank you very much for those who are willing to contribute to our seventh tradition efforts. I'll put in the chat the link to our seventh tradition. We're trying to raise money for Alcoholics Anonymous intergroups and New York and whatever else we can. And I'm happy to report that we're currently splitting up $3,000 that we collected over the last 6 months. So that's it for that. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Retouching on what Adam talked about, it says we may be short on our accounts and unable to make good. It goes back to, many of us had philosophical convictions galore. When I borrowed that money from somebody, I wanted to pay it back. When I took out that loan, when these people gave me a loan, I had in my mind, I wanted to pay it back. But I was caught up in the grips of an obsession greater than any human power. And this is what I did. I didn't have the power to keep those promises to these creditors, to these people. Top of
79, although
all these repercussions are innumerable forms, they are general principles which we find guiding. General principles which we find guiding, reminding ourselves that we've decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience. And that's the third time now that the book talks about going to any lengths. We ask that we be given the strength and the direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. Again, it's more of an 8-step prayer that we're asking God for help. We may lose our position or our reputation or face jail, but we are willing. The consideration there is, am I willing? Am I willing to do this when I'm sitting with somebody? Am I willing to face this? And my experience is you start out with the amends that you are willing to, and then the ones that you might not be willing to, hopefully you start to change. But there's one theory is we continue to ask God for the willingness. That's the key to this step, is asking God for the willingness. We must, there's another must, not shrink at anything. Usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we're not able to be hastily or foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. A man we know had remarried. Because of his resentment and drinking, he had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to the court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life and had secured a position, was getting his head above water. It would have been impressive heroics if he had walked up to the judge and said, "Here I am." We thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary, but if he were in jail, then he could provide nothing for neither family. We suggested he write his first wife, admitting his faults and asking for forgiveness. He did. He also sent small amount of money. He told her that he would try to do what he would try and do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Of course, she did not, and the whole situation has been adjusted. And I've seen, something similar happen to that, where you're going to the person and sticking to what you're doing. I've had sponsees commit to small amounts of money to get out of a huge jackpot and have the job, and then for whatever reason think that after making payments for 2 or 3 months that they don't have to make it anymore. So whatever deal we make regarding money, make it something that you could afford to do and keep making those payments, because again, we're trying to live a new way of life. Adam?
Yeah, this is the kind of 3-dimensional thinking that I think is really important through like the guidance of a spiritual advisor or a sponsor. It's critical. I've seen people go right from their 4-step to jail. It's like without even considering the implications of what that might be. And and in a general way, I had a lot of this stuff going on. I was on planes all over the country in my amends. It was awful. And I had to be very cautious, and I had to work very closely with a sponsor and with counsel and so forth to take care of that stuff. And if you're new and you're frightened about this stuff, it's normal. It's normal. You know, I know what it's like to be, you know, banging my head on the steering wheel in fear of going and making that amends and knocking on that door. It's very, very hard. And that's, again, these are the obstacles. This is probably the hardest place where people balk at 4 with the shame. And again, here, this is where the fear just takes over, and it's very hard. And, you know, I've had to pray on it. We were talking about it. Some of those amends, now when I look at it years later, they became a lot easier. I have our home group, and I know this is going to be very frustrating to some people. They will not allow you to share in our home group unless you've completed amends. That's just the way they are. They're brutal. And, you know, a lot of people are resentful, but then once they complete their amends, you know what I mean? It's almost like a sponsor telling a sponsee they can't have sex till they write their 4th step. It's like done right away. It's like you throw a little bit of a, like, you know, a carrot in there. All of a sudden, like, yeah, you can't share in our home group till you've completed your amends. And it's like, it's very interesting. I've also seen groups where people go knock on doors with their sponsees. I've seen that too, Ralph, where, you know, a couple people will help somebody to walk through that 9th step that you don't. Where is it said that you have to do it by yourself? I've seen people walk through amends with other people that have got on planes and gone to their hometowns and knocked on doors with them. It's wonderful. I mean, that's stuff that you'll see in AA, you'll see nowhere else. That, believe it or not, you do not have to do this on your own. One of the most powerful experiences I've ever seen is that kind of love and kindness. It is here. Not everywhere, but you will find that here.
Yeah. Go ahead, Adam.
We're at usually, correct?
Yeah.
Usually, however, other people are involved. This is where you can't save your skin at the expense of someone else.
The next paragraph, bottom.
We thought he ought to be willing.
Yeah.
We thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary, but if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. We suggested he write his first wife admitting his fault and asking forgiveness. We did this one already, Ralph. He did, and spent a small amount of money. He told her what he would try to do in the future, and he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Of course, she did not, and the whole thing has been adjusted. You did that, Ralph. Continue.
Yeah. Okay. Before taking this drastic action, we might implicate other people or to secure consent if we have obtained permission. We consult with others. Ask God to help. The drastic step is indicated we must not shrink. In other words, if you committed a crime with someone else and you want to come clean, obviously, if your co-dependent is out there, your co-defendant is still out there, you wouldn't, you always, it's best to talk to your sponsor about this, maybe reach out to the other person, but to try and get, don't just lead with the chin, especially if we could get someone else in trouble. I just was working with someone, they had Home Depot on their shopping list. I'm like, which one? He goes, well, pretty much everyone in Connecticut. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And he's like, no. And I'm like, well, how much money? He goes, I have no idea. Probably thousands and thousands of dollars. I'm like, and then he told me that every day he would go shopping there and take stuff. And so when we had to try and approach that one, Home Depot just said he can't be on these premises. They knew who he was. He's got a no trespass, and we don't care about any type of amends that you want to make. So we worked out something different with him where he would do some charity work and do stuff like that. So there's certain ones that are real criminal activity where there could be still consequences. I've also worked with people that used to rob houses. They robbed so many houses and they got to go, similar to Clint's story. He walked up to this door. He had stole silverware. He had no idea how expensive the silverware was. And the lady was just like, okay, well, you're trying to get better. And he had to pay around $12,000. And he's still making those amends. The lady actually ended up dying, and she got a letter from the lady's son and daughter, Beth, that said, okay, we're selling the house. There's no more need or whatever. Mom's gone. But so I've seen crazy stuff happen on the criminal side where the person didn't go to jail, but did have to pay money. But most cases, convenience stores are like, oh, I wish more people were like you, trying to make amends. Could you go collect money from all the other employees that worked here? I've seen crazy stuff happen in trying to right these wrongs. And it's kind of contagious. Once you start to do it, you want to do another one and another one. We used the cue card things. And my sponsor, we went through the ones that I was willing to do. We came up with a plan. Okay, when you're going to do it, you pray beforehand. This is what you're going to say. No matter what, you're not going to say this. And the most important part of any of these amends that I've made is after I'm done talking, just shut up and listen. Listen what the other person says. Adam?
You know, it's so obvious now when we were talking about the relationship between the bedevilments on page 52 and the promises on 83. And I mean, it's so obvious, like fear of people and economic insecurity are going to leave us. I mean, no kidding. You know, if you make the amends, you start to see how we intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. Each one of these promises that we look at in that 9th step are directly related to these actions. One of the things my sponsor said to me, he said, "What do you want from AA? You keep recycling through the rooms every time there's a crisis." And what he said was, because I remember I said I want a yacht and a Learjet, and he looked at me and he said, if you work steps 4 through 9 and you consistently develop this discipline, what you'll get is a quiet mind and a loving heart. And if you look at it, this end game, this thing that they talk about, the grouch and the brainstorm on page 66, the opposite of the quiet mind is the mind that won't shut up. The opposite of the loving heart is a vindictive heart, the prejudiced heart. And I started to see that I'd been crucified between these two thieves, yesterday and tomorrow. And yesterday I have guilt, shame, and remorse, and tomorrow I have fear, anxiety, and worry. And these things, as I do these amends and I walk through this path here, what's so amazing is I start to develop this spiritually centered, God-centered mind. It really is a process that brings me to a place where I can be centered. It's very, very powerful. It is a systematic approach to a spiritual experience. So this brings to mind a story of one of our friends while drinking accepted a sum of money from a bitterly hated business rival, giving him no receipt for it. So he couldn't prove it. He subsequently denied ever receiving the money and used the incidents as a basis for discrediting the man. He thus used his own wrongdoing as a means of destroying the reputation of another. It's pretty vicious. In fact, his rival was ruined. He felt that he had done a wrong he could not possibly make right. If he opened that old affair, he was afraid it would destroy his reputation of his partner, disgrace his family, and take away his means of livelihood. What right had he to involve those dependent upon him? How could he possibly make a public statement exonerating his rival? And it continues, after consulting with his wife and partner. So this is the method. He consults with all parties involved. He came to the conclusion it was better to take those risks than stand before his creator guilty of such ruinous slander. Very powerful. He saw that he had to place the outcome in God's hands or he would soon start drinking and couldn't live with it anymore. I understand if you know what that's like for something to take up space in your head rent-free. I got tired of that. I wanted a quiet mind. And this was where I had to start to live by a code of honor. Okay? It says here, we had to place the outcome in God's hands where he would start drinking and all would be lost anyhow. He said he attended church for the first time in many years. After the sermon, he quietly got up and made an explanation in front of the whole congregation. His action met widespread approval. Today is one of the most trusted citizens in our town. This all happened years ago. That's powerful. I think it's really, really powerful. That guy's my hero. He's really my hero. That's a big deal. And I think now, when you hear someone share in recovery, you can tell in about 2 or 3 minutes of the share whether they've done this work or not. You'll hear it in the way that they look at their life. They've been able to separate the spiritual from the material. Ralph?
Yeah, I think about that line. He saw he had to place the outcome in God's hands or he would start drinking again and all be lost anyways. And I think about what it says on page 100. You don't have to go there, but it says it's only when we look back and realize that things that came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands are better than anything we could have planned on our own, follow the dictates of a higher power. And, Adam, you said something about what you wanted when you first got sober. And last Wednesday, I just celebrated 20 years. And if you would have asked me what I wanted when I was 6 months sober or a year sober as compared to what I have today, it would have been worlds apart. Like I wouldn't even understood what I wanted then compared to what I have now. And what I have now is out of 24 hours a day, most of the hours I have peace. I'm not worried about what's going to happen tomorrow, and I'm not worried about what I did yesterday. It's that peace, and the peace comes from going through this process. The chances that we have domestic troubles, anyone have domestic troubles? Perhaps we are mixed up with women in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. We doubt it. This respect, alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people. But drinking does complicate sex relations in the home. After a few years with an alcoholic, the wife gets worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative. How could she be anything else? The husband begins to feel lonely, sorry for himself. He commences to look around in the nightclubs or their equivalent for something besides liquor. Perhaps he's having a secret and exciting affair with the girl, parentheses, who understands. In fairness, we must say that she may understand, but we're going to about the thing like that. What are we going to do with a thing about that? A man so involved often feels very remorseful at times, especially if he is married to a loyal and courageous girl who has literally gone through hell for him. It's the story of many, 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 many people, including myself. This is me. I hung out with people that let me do things the way that I wanted to do them. And I had a girl at home that I tortured. She didn't know if I was coming home. She didn't know if I was alive. Tortured. So when I read this book, I say, this is me. Not proud of it, but this is me. Adam?
This paragraph's incomplete without the next one. It says, whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. If we are sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Okay, this is the part, this is what we call in law an exculpatory clause, where when to injure them or others. Okay, not always, we think. If she knows in a general way that we have been wild, should we tell her in detail? Undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. She may insist on knowing all the particulars. Okay, she will want to know who the woman is and where she is. This is where all of a sudden someone might destroy someone else's marriage and then destroy the lives of blameless children and so forth and so on. This is where caution is very, very important. And unfortunately, Ralph, I've seen a lot of people in recovery, even people that are sponsoring people, give people advice that's caused more damage. See, sometimes our solutions are worse than our problems, right? We treat loneliness with isolation, right? We treat anxiety with caffeine. We treat depression with country western music. I need a sponsor that can give me some kind of guidance in this area. It becomes very, very important. It says she will want to know who the woman is, right? We feel we ought to say to her, we have no right to involve the other person. It's very important, okay? We are sorry for what we've done. God willing, it shall not be repeated, right? You can't stop doing that. Don't be in a relationship. That's what I think. More than that, we cannot do. We have no right to go further. Though we may be justifiable exceptions, there may be, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, we have often found this is the best course to take. Very, very powerful, very important. I tell people, if you don't change your sobriety date will, that's been my experience. Like the book says, in this case, based on relationships, if my behavior continues to harm others, and that means fancied or real, just because they don't know doesn't mean I'm not creating spiritual harm, because I'm making somebody look like a fool in front of God, right? That's what I'm doing. I got to be real careful about that. Ralph?
In an inventory, don't forget, you got the 9 questions that we just talked about in the inventory in regards to this. The harms that I did, the harms that people do, sometimes they may seem, oh, well, she didn't know or anything like that. Assuming that the person has an idea about the person, I found it not good to let the person know the person, because this day and age, with my sponsors, I seen the person who was harmed, hurt people, go after the person viciously, all kinds of different things. But there are clear-cut directions here as what to do. It says we don't. It says
Design.
we're at. I jumped the page.
Last part of 81. Last sentence.
It says our design for living is not a one-way street. It is good for the wife as it is for the husband. So if we can forget, so could she. And I think one of the things in moving forward is like it should be a statutation of limits on crimes done in relationships if you're going to move forward. And to me, it's like, I always wanted things just to be wiped away, but it seems like they always bring stuff back up a week later or 2 months later or 6 months later when I was being good. So this is where the forgiveness happens. And the best way it happened for me was just to change the behavior and know that I created this person who I'm living with now to be this neurotic, insecure person by my behavior. I'm the one that did it. So if I have to answer a lot of other questions, or where are you, or where were you, or why didn't you, like these other questions, I drove that person to act like that. Perhaps there are some cases with the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider could appraise such an intimate situation. It may be that both will decide the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. Each might pray about it, having the one's happiness utmost in mind. Keep it always in sight that we are dealing with the most terrible human emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than the risk of face-to-face combat. Adam?
Yeah, I think I have this written in my book. It says, honor is a gift that a man gives himself. I think that if you're new, one of the things I realized at that point is I cannot cheat this exercise. I can't, because I'm only cheating myself. Very, very powerful. So if we have no such complication, there is plenty we should do at home. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. Okay, like that's enough. Certainly he must keep sober, for there will be no home at all if he doesn't. But he is yet a long way from making good to the wife or parents for whom years he is so shockingly treated. Passing all understanding is the patience mothers and wives have had with alcoholics. Had this not been so, many of us would have no homes today, or perhaps we would be dead. The alcoholic is like a tornado, roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted. See, we can't see any of this if you're new. You want to go to Al-Anon and listen to the other side of it. You know what I mean? It says here, selfishness and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking if he says sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who came up from the cyclone cellar to find his home ruined, and to his wife he says, don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Isn't it grand the wind stopped long? I can't help laughing because I lived my whole life like that. I lived my whole life. We're the only people that want to reward because we ran out. Damage and the harm that I caused my parents. I realized how selfish I'd been. It was awful. It didn't even occur to me until later. I think everyone's muted.
I think you froze.
You guys could still hear me. Ralph, could you hear me?
You froze for a while.
Did I freeze?
Yeah.
You froze. All right. So taking from the top of that page, and ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing? That was me. Like, look, I'm not drunk. I haven't drank in a week. Isn't it great? I'm not drinking. That's what that happens. But I just destroyed the whole household, the job, the career, everything. But that's because it's all about me. Yes, there is a long reconstruction ahead. We must take the lead. A remorseful mumbling, I'm sorry, won't fill the bill at all. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, and being carefully not to criticize them. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are that our own actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with family asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love.
Very good.
And I had to answer a lot of questions from my family for a long time in early sobriety. And I had to be very patient with them because, you know, I gave my parents many times in my drinking and drugging careers false hope, you know, where they'd be saying, oh, yeah, he's doing good. He's doing good. And I start to have them have faith. And then just one day I don't show up. So it took me really sponsoring people and seeing other people go through to what I got to really understand what I put my family through from years of this abuse of just not being there, being inconsistent, doing the things that I did, watching them see me shackled, having my father come visit me when I was locked up, you know. So it took me a long time to reconstruct this family, and it was well worth it. Why don't we stop there, Adam, for today, before we get into the spiritual life?
Yeah, we're the only people that want a reward because we ran out of a burning building, Ralph.
Yeah.
Ralph, we do have a question that came out a long time ago from Nadia. She'd like you to repeat your acronym for the 7 deadly sins.
Paggles.
Paggles. Pride, anger, greed, gluttony, envy, lust, sloth. Paggles. Paggles.
Excellent.
Any other questions?
If you do have a question, raise your hand. We'll get you unmuted. There's Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy Alcoholic.
Wendy.
You said it too fast, Ralph. I can't get it down. I got as far as, I thought you said angry twice. It's like pride, angry, greed, gluttony, something, sloth.
Lust, envy, sloth.
Lust.
Paggles.
I put it in the chat.
Thank you. I'm done.
It's just an easy way to remember it.
Oh, Ralph, congratulations. 20 years.
Thank you.
With drunk like you is amazing.
Thank you, guys.
Looks like you get a break this week, guys.
Yeah, it's all stalled up on amends. It's interesting.
Yeah. Surprised we had this many people.
That's good, you know. Usually